let's get started with these new escalations between NATO and Russia. And in the European countries, the United States, they're talking about attacking Russia, inside Russia, using the NATO weapons in Romania, Poland, or even in Ukraine. And at the same time, we've seen that Dmitry Medvedev was responding to these type of rhetorics coming from the West so solidly, so in a very serious manner, he was responding to them. How do you evaluate right now the situation between Russia and NATO?
It's a very good question, Nima, because I am in Moscow for 5 days now. I arrived from Doha at beginning of the week. I had zillions of meetings, dinners, meeting friends, and etc. for the past 5 days. And obviously, this is practically topic number one. You can feel that there is a consensus and emerging in corridors of power, academia, think tanks here, diplomats, businessmen, that everybody is now already fed up to the limit with the whole thing, with the way Russia has been treated by the collective West, the non-stop provocations, the fact that they ignore every red line that was set by President Putin and the Security Council for the months after months after months. And of course, after this attack on the radars that are monitoring ballistic missiles, some with nuclear warheads coming into Russia from a distance of at least 6,000 kilometers. We can say that the attack in Aramvir near Krasnodar was relatively successful if we look at the pictures. I discussed this with some pretty well-informed people, and basically what they're saying is that, okay, minor damage to the towers, and that's it, not a big thing. And even if the antennas were touched, which is nobody knows, really nobody knows, this is a state secret, they are very fragile, but they can be repaired relatively quickly. Russia has the technology to do it. And the second attack was very complicated because it was very, very far away. It was in Orenburg. Orenburg is 1,500 kilometers from the front line. So this is deep, deep, deep into Russia. But the symbolic weight of these two attacks, this is something extremely, extremely serious. And putting on the record, managing his exasperation, of course, which he disguises very, very well under this cloak of like a Russian Taoist monk, if we can say it, concealing his emotions, being very, very rational always. They are already fed up. At the same time, they know that this is yet another provocation, another red line that has been crossed, and they know that plan A by NATO is to provoke a Russian response, so then NATO can blame Russia in the eyes of the whole planet. And the whole planet already knows this as well, that Russia is attacking NATO. So it's an enormous dilemma for Putin and the Security Council. You have to find a way to respond to these provocations in a devastating way, but not in a way that will provoke NATO into organizing the hot war operation or demonizing Russia or blaming Russia all over the world. And in fact, even if NATO would be able to launch a hot war against Russia, which they are not, they would lose this war in the first 20 minutes, for that matter. If this was real hot war, the most serious scenarios that I'm sure people with a brain in Brussels have access to, Russia, if they can, they could simply destroy all military airports in NATO in a matter of 20 to 30 minutes. Let's say 2 hours. And that's it. game over to start with. Not to mention other uses for Mr. Kinzhal, Mr. Zircon, etc., the club, the hypersonic club. So it's complicated because here there is a certain limit of what you can discuss publicly on the fact that these provocations and trespassing of red lines, what would imply the Russian response. For instance, I wrote a column this week about it, but I had limits. There were things that I simply could not write or publish because it will go straight against the rules of the Ministry of Defense in Russia. So all of us, even foreigners, in my case, will have to be extremely careful about that. Even though we have access to some information, but even that kind of information cannot be published. It's considered a state secret. So this is, on so many levels, is such a sensitive issue. And at the same time, in a certain manner, time is running out for NATO, not for Russia. For NATO, because what's going to happen in the battlefield in the next few months is going to be decisive. And it can be crushing in terms of Ukrainian managing to repel anything that Russia throws against them. So we can have a situation in the battlefield in the next few months that will be irreversible and consolidate a total debacle of the Ukrainian army, the Ukrainian armed forces. And obviously, this is something that the Americans know, and some NATO generals may know. And that's why they're desperate. And that's why we have this pantomime, which is a sort of shadow play, pantomime, circus, kabuki, any way you want to describe it. We are discussing the possibility of the Ukrainians having some leeway to attack targets inside the Russian Federation. This is ridiculous because it's been already happening for months now. The first batch of attack MS, they came in January. The second batch, the longer range missiles, they came a few weeks later, maybe beginning of March. And they have been used literally every week. So this is a situation that is already ongoing. This pantomime of, okay, are you in favor? Are you not? NATO, no, we cannot do this, but some members may. But this is total bullshit. And everybody knows this is bullshit, especially here. So this is basically to fool Western public opinion that is already brainwashed 24/7 on everything regarding the war. So we are at a very clinical and dangerous crossroads at the moment. And this is something that you can feel here in every conversation. It's latent in every conversation. People are worried, well-informed people are worried. Next week is the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. I'm sure this will be one of the main items of conversation, apart from the rush towards the multipolar world, de-dollarization, etc. But this is essential because now it's like the preamble for a possible end game to this war. And you still hear in every conversation here in Moscow with people, well situated, that this war has been going on for too long. So there is now a consensus, and you can feel this consensus even on a popular level. Let's finish this thing off. And we should have done this before. If we don't finish this off soon, the hybrid war with NATO included against Russia and the attacks against Russia will proliferate nonstop from now on. So I think this gives to you and to our audience a little bit of how incandescent the situation is at the moment. And it's great to feel the pulse here in Moscow. You feel, for instance, I just came back from the Park Pobedi, Victory Park, where they are exhibiting the NATO Wunderwaffen that they captured in Novorossiya. So when you get to the park and you see these Bradleys, Leopards, etc., and everybody's smiling, taking pictures, etc. So it's a sort of a relaxed moment of they say, look, they're talking about all this bullshit. Look at all their weapons. We captured them all, and there are films about it, radios that they capture, intelligence, you name it. So this is, let's say, a sort of light-hearted relief, because the atmosphere, the tension, you can feel it. It's palpable. It's in the air. Even in this beautiful summer air in Moscow, you can feel it, you know.
The other day I was talking with Larry. We were talking
With
about,
Larry.
yeah,
Yes.
we were talking about Philippines and Taiwan, and how China sees Taiwan is totally different the way China sees Philippines, because if Philippines gets involved in any kind of conflict with China, China will destroy Philippines. And because they have some sort of love for Taiwan, because Taiwan is part of China. They don't
Of
want to
course.
go to war with Taiwan, but if anything happens between Philippines and China, it would be totally different. Right now in Ukraine, I think it's the same. If Romania or Poland gets involved in any of these countries getting involved in this conflict in Ukraine, Russia would not be patient, as we have been witnessing during this conflict for 2 years. They have some sort of love, the way China has for Taiwan. They have some sort of love for Ukraine and Ukrainians, because they see them as their brothers.
The problem is that any practical reaction that would include attacking assets inside these countries will be invoked by NATO, as invoke Article 5, and basically launch a direct war between NATO and Russia with beyond unpredictable consequences. Russia doesn't want that for obvious reasons. And NATO should not want that, because they know they're going to lose this thing badly and very, very fast. So the problem is, who is running the show? It's not NATO. It's the Pentagon to a certain extent. Don't forget that the Pentagon runs NATO. NATO doesn't have free will. NATO is not sovereign. So if NATO is not sovereign, the 27 members of NATO are not sovereign, by definition. But even the Pentagon, they have zillions of scenarios and games, and they know what could happen. And every scenario is really, really bad for NATO. The problem is the people who run the show are the people who are upstairs. Some of their messengers, guess what is happening this weekend? In fact, it started on Thursday and it ends on Sunday in Madrid. The Bilderberg Club annual meeting. And I published the list of attendees in my Telegram. And when you look at it, it's a compact of NATO stand. Everybody's there, including those people who never won a war in their lives and pose as war experts or war pundits, like David Petraeus. These are the kind of people who go to the Bilderberg Club. Who are these people? They're messengers. They are, you see the editor of The Economist in London. What is she? She's a lowly messenger. The people who run the show they send these people to Bilderberg to talk, blah, blah, and do some blah, 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 and interact think tanks, diplomats, CEOs, etc. But they make the decisions upstairs. And the way this thing is being configured and the way the PR operation is being led is that they seem to have made the decision of a hot war against Russia. It's palpable. It's something that your gut feeling tells you, yes, they want it. They don't know how to conduct it. They have no bloody clue what's going to happen next. It would be, if a war like that happened, it will be, of course, in terms of erasing the American unpayable debt, would be manna from heaven. Okay, they're not going to pay anything anyway. So instead of America defaulting, a great reset. We turn everything back to zero, start all over again. And these trillions of dollars will never be paid anyway. So this is what some of the guys who are running the show, they are thinking along these lines. And don't forget that these people don't have military experience. If they talk to a serious military analysts, their fantasy, their theories would be debunked in 5 minutes. But the problem is these people control the international financial system, the international system of power, the system of international relations, the institutions of post Second World War, etc. The big families that invest in big investment banks, Atlanticist interests, from the east coast of the US all across Europe, especially Northern Europe, especially the Netherlands and Germany, especially much more than Latin Europe, although they have their messengers, emissaries in Latin Europe as well. Mario Draghi is one of the top messengers of these people, So the notion that they may have already made up their mind, and yes, we need a hot war to revert everything back to zero, to reset the whole thing. This is very, very dangerous because it's day by day, it looks to all of us that it's plausible that they have made this decision, although they don't know how to implement it. So they are provoking at the moment this pantomime about a decision that has already been made, which is to strike the Russian Federation inside the Russian Federation. And they have to know that this is the ultimate red line. And the Russians keep saying it, and Putin keeps saying it, and Medvedev keeps saying it more bluntly, and still they're not paying attention. So that's why it's so dangerous, because if we have, okay, let's assume it's the Russian government is an extremely rational player, especially Putin. Putin is a legalistic guy. He never takes impulsive decisions. He always calculates. But let's suppose that there is a lot of pressure over Putin from significant, powerful players here in Moscow, for instance, that we need a serious response now. And that involves a strike against assets inside one of the NATO countries. Then all bets are off, because then we were going to be in a direct NATO-Russia war, the war that those people running the show want, but it's not what Russia wants. And that's the only plausible explanation to understand why Putin is being so careful the way he's maneuvering. But sooner or later, in the next few months, as they get more desperate, the level of provocation can become unsustainable. And that's what nobody wants at the moment. But all of us, when we look at it, day after day, we see that it's getting closer and closer and closer. You see? So this is the dilemma.
Biden says that NATO is stronger than ever with these two new members. At the same time, we're hearing that in Europe, in Hungary, there are some demonstrations in Hungary against the government or Hungary getting involved in the conflict against Russia. Orban is talking about that we're gonna see some changes in Europe, we're gonna see some political changes in the United States that would bring peace. Do you see peace coming with these new changes that Orban is predicting, or it's just a dream for them?
It's hard to tell, Nima. Well, the split inside Europe, in many aspects, is a positive development. For instance, Hungary and Italy at different levels. They are completely against this NATO folly of escalating and nonstop. I was in Italy 2 weeks ago. Before coming here, I was in Italy, then I went to Qatar, and now I'm in Russia. And in Italy, I was interacting with academics, intellectuals, progressive people, dissidents, anti-woke, anti-Brussels, anti the way Italy is losing its sovereignty or lost its sovereignty completely. And they expect that there will be a serious split inside not only NATO, but the EU. The split inside NATO, in fact, is mirrored by the split inside the EU. And we can with a measure of certainty, we can say that once the whole thing starts derailing, the derailing will be in parallel. Both will be derailing in parallel. The EU institutions and the NATO institution as a whole. Because any nation inside Europe or NATO who thinks in terms of sovereignty simply cannot accept the status quo and the way the status quo is going down the drain all the time, and the way international relations, for that matter, are going down the drain. So if you have these absolutely crazy actors such as Poland, Finland, Sweden, the Baltic Chihuahuas, etc., but these are a minority inside NATO. They monopolized NATO because from an American point of view, this is exactly what they want. The ideal NATO for the Americans is London, Warsaw, the Baltic Chihuahuas, and obviously now that Kiev collapsed completely, maybe they can get Finland or Sweden or both. So this is the NATO they want. They want a warmongering NATO. And okay, the liver sausage in Germany and the little king in Paris, as mediocre as they are, they see that this is not a good deal for both of them or for the EU as a whole. So they're trying to counterbalance a little bit this warmongering. Although, if you pay attention to Macron's rhetoric, it's a warmongering rhetoric from A to Z. And Scholz, even with his responses, is the same thing. I'm not going to send missiles. I'm not going to send, but in the end, he keeps sending them. So, but at least there is a let's say a dynamic of chaos inside the EU and NATO at the same time, because they have their backs against the wall. Because the war that they thought that they would win in a few months in Novorossiya turned into a complete disaster, and the blowback is gigantic against their own economies, against all of their economies for that, and they never had a plan B. And now you cannot improvise in the middle of a hot war in the Eastern Europe, practically, if you consider Ukraine Eastern Europe, you cannot improvise a plan B. No way. These things take years to put in place. It's a coherent strategy, and they don't have a strategy for that matter. They have tactics. Tactics here, tactics there, but they cannot think strategically, especially now under pressure where they have to come to the conclusion of how we're going to change our strategy, come up with a new strategy is going to be effective, and on top of it, win the war on the ground. No, they cannot do anything. So what do we have? Okay, let's send more weapons. Let's prolong this thing. Let's kill another 500,000 Ukrainians, which is what's going to happen in the end. If this thing keeps going, they will kill another 500,000, another million Ukrainians, but that's the logic of the whole operation. Fight the war until the last Ukrainian. So what is going to be next? Fight the war until the last Moldovan, the last Polish, the last Czech, the last Romanian? I'm not sure the populations in these countries will agree with that, you know. So the absence of strategic thinking, the refusal to contemplate reality, the completely dysfunctional setup of all these political leaderships from Western Europe to Eastern Europe. It's no wonder. It's absolutely no wonder. And the Russians look at it and they say, wow, we are really fighting not an empire, but a setup of total chaos. We are fighting the personification of total chaos. And they want to impose their chaos on us. Like, you know, in their minds is, we start attacking Russian Federation. It's going to be a social chaos or social turmoil in Russia everywhere. Things are going to, start burning, turn upside down. Maybe there's going to be a color revolution in Moscow. They actually believing these things, So it is frightening. It's once again total irrationality on one side and rational thinkers on this side that have to find weapons to fight the irrationality on the same level of the irrationality, because then there will be the only way that the irrationals will understand how irrational they are in the end. But I'm not very optimistic, and many of our friends, the people who come to your show, for instance, think we all more or less think along the same lines. We cannot be optimistic.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Yeah. If you remember when this conflict started in Ukraine, Turkey, under the pressure coming from the United States, they start sending drones to Ukraine. They were helping Ukraine. At the same time, they had relationship with Putin. They know how important is that. That was so amazing how they could manage that. But at the same time, right now, they're talking about, just yesterday, Turkey said if NATO wants to get involved with a direct conflict with Russia, they're not gonna be there. They're not gonna fight Russia. This is huge, I think. This is the first time Turkey is talking about this. And this is a really significant fracture that is happening right now in the column of NATO. And we know that this decision on the part of Turkey would be, at the same time, Turkey didn't want to have any sort of tensions between Turkey and Russia. And we know after that we have this conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Gaza, and Russia's policy is totally in line with Turkey's policy in Gaza. That would bring these two countries together. How do
Right.
you see this new position of Turkey within NATO? What would that mean for NATO?
Well, Nima, you know how Erdogan is an excellent poker player. He may not be cultured. He's a semi-illiterate. My friends in Istanbul tell me that he doesn't read anything. And when he reads the Quran, he doesn't know even how to read the Quran properly or interpret it properly. He doesn't have a single book in his palace, that gigantic, glitzy, bling bling palace in Ankara. But he's like I tend to compare him to a very savvy carpet seller in the bazaar in Istanbul, that he can sell you any carpet in the world the way he wants it, if you give him a little bit of time and lots of green cups of green tea. But he's a master dribbler. Now, like if he was a footballer, he would be like a Ronaldo. The previous Ronaldo, the Brazilian one, master dribbler, and he can advance very fast when he wants at the same time. And imagine Erdogan looking at the chessboard at the moment. Gaza, NATO relations, relations with Iran and Russia, and also with China. Everybody lining up to get into BRICS. Russia as an observer of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and they want to become a full member as well. So where are Turkey's interests at the moment? To the east, not to the west. And so he starts little by little the Erdogan way, probing here and there. He said that he won't be part of a NATO war, which makes total sense, even though technically he has the second most powerful NATO army. If we consider Ukraine the first army, yes. If we don't consider Ukraine, Turkey is the most powerful NATO army. You cannot compare the stupid French army with the Turkish army. And he also said something. I think in the last 24 hours, we could even reconsider our position in Syria as long as our borders are protected. As far as I remember, it's the first time that he says that. So he even started reconsidering Syria, and they were running a pretty complex smuggling occupation, extremist operation in Syria. Gaziantep was basically a revolving door for jihadis, that kind of stuff. So when you say, wow, Erdogan, he's smoking something maybe. And he's smoking some good something,
Yeah.
maybe from Kurdish areas in the mountains, you know. And of course, he looks at what he can do in peaceful terms with this very fuzzy, hazy organization of Turkic states, which is basically expansion of Turkey in Central Asia. I would say the expansion would be more trade and commercial than anything else. Or, to put it bluntly, more real estate development contracts for Turkish companies in Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan, etc. This is what they're a business thing, you know. But for them, it's very important. New markets, of course. And this implies a good relations with all the neighbors in Central Asia. And this implies what? That we need to enter the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, because then we are at the same table with everybody and we'll be discussing in equal terms, and also with Turkey, with India, Russia, China, Iran, etc. So he's not a fool. He's not a fool. And in terms of foreign policy, he really knows how to dribble. And what does the US and NATO have to offer Turkey in practical terms? Absolutely nothing. They are offering a hot war against Russia. Is Turkey, who needs badly Russian oil and gas, not to mention Russia building nuclear power stations for Turkey, are they going to buy a fight against Russia? Only an idiot would bet on it, right? So his moves in the Erdogan way, you know, they make total sense for the moment. Of course, this could be only rhetoric. With Erdogan, we never know. The problem with Erdogan, and I heard this from diplomats from different countries, is he's totally untrustworthy. I mean, 200%, 1,000,000%. But of course, they look at his actions. If what he's saying now is complemented by his actions in terms of dealing with NATO, in terms of Syria, etc., you know, he's going to start to be way more respected by the Shanghai Cooperation Organization nations, and even BRICS. Like, you know, Turkey is on the waiting line for BRICS as well, but it's not on the top tier. Depending on how they act, the Russians and the Chinese, they can look at, oh, maybe it's a good deal to bring them in, you know. If we know that you can bring them in and they're not going to be a Trojan horse, yes, it's going to happen.
Yeah. Right now, beside this conflict in Ukraine, we have new escalations in Taiwan as well. The United States talking about, even, I don't know if you heard that Michael McCall said that we're gonna send new generations of weapons to Taiwan, unlike what we've sent to Ukraine. They're already admitting that they were sending crappy weapons to Ukraine. That's pretty amazing. When you see after 2 years, he said that. And he's talking about new escalations between China and Taiwan. And at the same time, as we talked before, there are some political movement in Philippines to prepare Philippines for any sort of tensions between the United States and China. And how do you see right now the current state of this conflict in Taiwan? Do you think that we are heading toward new escalations, or Chinese can manage the tensions and then can bring tensions down?
Nima, the Chinese are not exactly worried about this because they know that the Americans only have a plan A in terms of Taiwan. Divide and rule. Provoke anything inside Taiwan, with the government, outside of the government, CIA, dark ops, false flags, you name it. So they already have real vaccines against all that. And I'm not talking about toxic cocktails, real vaccines. So they know how to deal with that. So they have to be patient. And of course, they are patient the Chinese way. They are patient at launching messages. This weekend, for instance, while we were talking about NATO provoking Russia more and more, the Bilderberg Club meeting in Madrid, where they are the number one topic of discussion is obviously what's going to happen with us in Ukraine if we lose. If we lose, no, considering that we are losing. There's the Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore, which ends on Sunday. It started Friday, ends on Sunday. I used to go to this dialogue a lot when I lived in Southeast Asia. It's important because it's the number one security summit every year in Asia. And everybody goes. That's important. Not only Southeast Asia. The Russians used to go in the past. The Chinese go. They send a top delegation every year. The Americans, of course, they said this year they had weapons peddler Lloyd Austin in person in Singapore, talking to the new Chinese Ministry of Defense. And was very, very interesting because in the beginning of the summit, Marcos Jr., ruler of Philippines, his speech was basically a speech prepared by the Pentagon and the State Department, saying that U.S. is absolutely essential for the security and the prosperity of the region, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The response by the Chinese was absolutely fantastic. And it takes one sentence, in fact, one metaphor. Essentially, they said, we should not invite wolves into the house. That's it. So this is the whole Chinese answer. We know exactly what's going on. We know who the wolves are, and we are not going to allow for these wolves to be invited into the house. And the house is the common Southeast Asian, South China Sea house, the whole region. You know, the southeast coast of China, Taiwan, South China Sea, the countries of Southeast Asia that border the South China Sea, 5 of them, the whole that region as a whole. So I'm not sure the Filipinos under Marcos understand that, because Philippines is a very complicated thing. Philippines is ruled by 20 families and 2 or 3 alternating power. It's a mess. It's an absolute mess. And now it happens to be the Marcos family in power again, which are American assets, of course. So they're playing his master voice game, obviously. The Chinese know that from, back to back. And they know that they have to be patient. They have to issue some messages here and there. And when it comes to Taiwan, that was even better, because then they sent a graphic message. They simply encircled Taiwan. 360 degrees. They completely encircled Taiwan in exercises in a little over a day. They didn't have to say anything. Just look at the map. Just see how Taiwan in a circle. Okay, are you going to try to launch a war against us using Taiwan? Oh, yeah? Okay. And they didn't have to prove that they have carrier killer missiles. They didn't have to do a Houthi-style demonstration, which is attacking the USS Dwight Eisenhower. Nobody on the planet ever did that. The Houthis had the cojones, as we say in Spanish, balls in English, to do it. They were the first ever to do that. So this is absolutely extraordinary. The Chinese, they don't even have to do something. The Chinese are much more circumspect. They prefer to cultivate a nice metaphor, cultivate a very nice message, come up with an image that they think encapsulates the situation, But sooner or later, if there is there's no question, if there is a serious American provocation or an attempt to a false flag, the response is going to be devastating. But it's the same thing. And this is one of the points where Russia and China, I would say, coalesce. And it reflects the fact that everything is being discussed at the highest level. Not only Kremlin Politburo, but Putin and Xi themselves on the phone, It's a concerted strategy. They know exactly that it's the same war against them. The war Ukraine-Taiwan is a war against both. They know that perfectly well. And the fact that their position in Gaza is becoming more and more, let's say, straightforward. We want a Palestine state. This is the Russia-China position. There has got to be an end to this war as soon as possible. They tried everything already inside the UN, and everything was blocked by the Americans. So this is also a reflection of these discussions at the highest level, you know. And for instance, here in Moscow, they know that the strategy in Taiwan will be a sort of Ukraine 2.0, if they could do it. They can't, but they would dream of launching a sort of Ukraine 2.0 in Taiwan. The Chinese obviously know it. They gamed it before. They also gamed every possible attack by the Americans against China with Taiwan as a pretext. And the results for the American side are not very encouraging, to say the least, you know. So they take their time. They are specialists in taking their time, biding their time, because the horizon for them is 2049, Nima. They don't want Taiwan reunited tomorrow or next year or in 2025. No, the horizon is 2049, as explained by Deng Xiaoping 20-something years ago. So they're not in a hurry. But the provocations will increase. There's no question about that. And they're going to use everything. They're going to use the Philippines. There's nobody else they can use in the South China Sea at the moment. But there will be hybrid war, coup, color revolutions, whatever attempts a little bit across Southeast Asia. I will be in Southeast Asia next month. It will be great for me to come back to my former home and get the feeling over there of what's happening. And meanwhile, while we're discussing all this, everybody in Southeast Asia wants to get into BRICS. Thailand is formalizing officially that they want to be part of BRICS, and Thailand is one of the key Chinese allies in Southeast Asia. Indonesia is I would say, is on the top tier to be part of the next BRICS expansion. And everybody else, Vietnam, absolutely interested as well. And everybody else is interested. So, you know, apart from Singapore, of course. Singapore is different, because Singapore is a sort of American aircraft carrier in the near the Strait of Malacca. That's a very complex positioning, and the Singaporeans, they are very good at masters of equilibrium as well. They know that they cannot antagonize China, but they also know that they cannot antagonize the empire, you know. And they are a trading power, so they need good relations with everybody. And they are sitting right beside one of the most key bottlenecks in connectivity corridors in the world, the Strait of Malacca. So we should not envy their position. They play it very well. They have excellent diplomats, not so much leaders, I would say, but their diplomacy is absolutely first class.
Yeah.
But it's complicated. In Southeast Asia, it's complicated, Nima. It's very complicated. Especially now that the Americans are desperate because they're losing. Basically, they're losing their main bases across Southeast Asia everywhere. The only thing that's really left for them is the Philippines with this current government. Doesn't mean that the next government is going to be the same.
Yeah. How do you see the position of Japan and South Korea? Recently, we've seen that there are no relationship, no some sort of talks, political talks between China, Japan, and South Korea. This is just so important between these three countries, and the way that they're gonna see the problem in Taiwan. Do you think that the United States, at the end of the day, if something happens, is able to force these two countries to get aligned with them, or even helping them attacking China?
No, South Korea, I doubt it. Japan, it depends on who's in power. Japan is very corrupt. I talked about this recently again. It's extremely corrupt. psychologically scared by what happened during the Second World War. They never recovered, and they never will, probably. So it's still a neo-colony. They can act against their own national interests if required by his master's voice. There's no question. But I don't see South Korea doing it unless under what? Regime change, another color revolution. Who cares? But they have excellent relations and technological relations with China as well, investment, etc. It's against their national interest to do something like this. And on top of it, they will be pitted against North Korea again. And North Korea could intervene. Don't forget that North Korea now is intimately linked with both Russia and China. So if South Korea if South Korea is forced to create a problem with China by the Americans, they will create a problem, an extra problem with the zillions of problems they already have with North Korea. Really bad move.
Yeah.
But Japan is easily manipulated. That's the problem. It's so sad. But it's we would need maybe an army of Freuds to explain what's going on in the Japanese psyche, you know.
The other thing right now, Pepe, is China, the Ministry of Defense of China is saying that the Chinese army is ready to defend justice in the world together with the Russian army. This is the first time they're talking about a coalition and so it's some sort of alliance between Russia and China just defending justice in the world. This is pretty amazing because China was in the background. It's been just more than a year they're trying to do some political moves in Asia, in the Middle East. Right now they're talking about their army together with Russia defending justice. And this is huge, I think. And do you think when they're talking about this, they're talking about Africa, they're talking about Middle East, what they're talking about? Where is this justice that they're talking about?
We don't know yet, Nima. I think they launched a concept. They launched the concept that the Chinese army is going to be more proactive in specific areas of the world without naming them. It is in itself, as you said, enormous. It is really, really huge because it's not passive anymore. Now they're going to have an active role. If they want to do that, this implies that they are very self-confident and confident of their new powers, their new weapons, which include, of course, what they are transacting with the Russians, the kind of technology that they are receiving from the Russians, the technologies that they've developed for the past 10, 12, 15 years. A self-confident army, okay, they don't have battleground experience like the Russian army has. But NATO doesn't have battleground experience for that matter. NATO is very good at bombing countries that cannot defend themselves. That's a completely different story. It's not battleground experience. But this has to do with, let's say, a process of China stepping out, in fact. Okay, we want to be one of the leaders of the multipolar world. We have to be much more active across the multipolar world. Makes total sense. So we don't have details for the moment, but we can understand that they have already worked on the concept. And that's a very Chinese thing. First, they work on the concept. Then they work on ways to implement the concept. That will be the next step. Next step, we're going to see the Chinese army intervening somewhere, as an example. And then we're going to see, so this is what they meant by having an international, global presence. They are not interested in intervening in areas in trouble, specific areas in trouble somewhere. No, it's the Chinese don't first of all, it's part of Chinese diplomacy. We don't interfere in internal affairs of other nations. But if it comes a situation when some nation in trouble calls for Chinese help, and then we could see Chinese boots on the ground and Chinese weapons on the ground. This will be an enormous game changer. But what's interesting is that now the concept is already on the table. And I'm sure they discussed this with the Russians before. And obviously they were thinking about their area, Eurasia. And they were thinking, for instance, about Central Asia. Central Asia can be very vulnerable to hybrid war tactics and strategies, color revolutions, coups, etc. And because they are members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, that should imply Russia and China military working closer and closer. So it will be very interesting to see the first nation or the first region where we have a direct Chinese interference. Interference, no, help. Let's put it this way.
If you were to draw the difference between the St. Petersburg Economic Forum and the World Economic Forum in Davos, how do you see the difference between these two institutions, these two entities?
Davos has a globalist agenda that they want to impose all over the world. That included everything from social engineering via a pandemic where they can exercise maximum social control, to depopulation dreams, which they do have and they discuss all the time, to they actually let's say more or less in the shade encourage the American forever wars, because it's a way to maintain the domination of the American empire, but mostly of the transnational empire, which is the one that really matters. And it's the financial, geoeconomic, Western-controlled empire. And these people work for the owners of this show, this particular show. So they have an agenda, they are highly ideological, and they exclude anyone capable of contradicting them. The St. Petersburg Forum is a completely different thing. St. Petersburg Forum is an economic forum about developing Russia and expanding Russian business, but at the same time welcoming several important players from the global majority. Every year there's a special country that is invited. There are always delegations from across, especially across Eurasia, but also coming from Africa, for instance, and the Arab world. It's inclusive. And it's about developing not only Russia, but developing Eurasia as a whole. I'll give an example. The first day of the forum, the first heavy day of the forum, I was looking at the sessions in the morning, and there are so many important and interesting sessions, and they're all at the same time. So if you're there, you are spoiled for choice, and you have to make some serious decisions. Which one I will go to follow personally? And of course, with the possibility of asking questions, etc. So at the same time, like 10 in the morning, for instance, you go there at 10 in the morning, you have a BRIC session, you have an international North-South transportation session, you have an Eurasia Economic Union session, you have a cyber warfare session. I said, wow, what do I do? And it's great because all of that is discussed. And with not only Russians, but with people from really most of Eurasia, Arab world, and other parts of the world as well. And that's what makes it extremely interesting. For instance, some of the best roundtables that I've seen personally on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization years ago, when nobody was talking about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, they were at the St. Petersburg Forum. I was probably the only Westerner in the room, Nima, to give you an idea. There were Russians, Chinese, lots of Central Asians, and a guy from outside. The Westerners were not even interested to see what they were discussing. And they were already discussing economic cooperation, not only security, what the Chinese call the three negative forces, something like that: extremism, separatism, jihadism, all that. This was the beginning of the SCO. Then they evolved into an economic cooperation mechanism. And when you look at how they discussed openly on the table, all of them, it's fantastic. It's a really democratic exercise, So when you go to the St. Petersburg Forum, you have these kinds of discussions everywhere and at every level. They discuss specific bilateral relations, for instance, Russia, China, Russia, India, Russia, Iran, as well. Great. So if you manage to, spend like 5-10 minutes in each of all these sessions, and then the afternoon as well, after 2 days or 3 days, you have a mass of information of what everyone is doing in several domains and how they interact. When you go to Davos, you already know the agenda. It's always the same thing. It excludes most of the global majority. It's heavily focused on Americans and Europeans, with a few Japanese thrown in, And of course, it's a heavily ideological discussion for their own ends, which are to perpetuate the current in an extremely unequal system of international relations. So that's the basic difference, And you have, of course, some major cheerleaders of everything. Let's fight against the autocracies of the East. America is still the most important military force in the world. So you hear one cliche after another all the time. So it's you don't go to Davos to listen to something that you don't already know. Once in a while, they have a foreign guest that stuns the audience with something, but that's very, very rare, In St. Petersburg, that you can have surprise. You can have surprises. You can have people. I don't know, a delegate from Bangladesh or from Laos who comes up with a fascinating formulation that nobody thought before. Creative, dynamic thinking, That's the basic difference.
Yeah. We know that there is an economic war. Some experts believe that it started in 2010. And right now, we know that the United States is forced to borrow approximately $8 trillion every 100 days.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what a strategic defeat looks like, in your opinion? Has the United States lost the war with China, in your opinion?
Well, when you're borrowing $8 trillion every 100 days, and you're paying zillions of trillions of dollars in interest every year on an unpayable debt, and if this was a viable economy, you would not be in a situation like this. So basically, this is a green paper printing setup, essentially. That is worse intrinsically, virtually nothing, So that comes back to the beginning of our conversation. The people who run this particular show, they know that the only way out, if there is a way out, is reset everything to zero. So we have a big war, a big conflagration, everything resets to zero. They don't pay anything, and everybody starts from scratch. This is what they actually think. First of all, because it's the only escape route that they have, right? But it's going to become even more complicated to convince the population of the US is going to be totally impossible, because now the population is polarized to an extent that we are at a pre-larval civil war state at the moment. The civil war is already there. It's in the larval state. It's right at the beginning, but it's already on. The process of a civil war is already on. And depending on what happens until the presidential elections, this thing can explode big time. and depending on how they're going to tweak the final results as well. I was discussing this with my American friends here in Moscow. They fear a civil war badly, depending on what happens in November. So you cannot sell to the American population anything. There's no unifying idea or proposal or dream that can be sold to the majority of the American population. This train has already left the station. The fissure and the cognitive dissonance between both sides in the US, or even if there are 3 or 4 sides, is unbridgeable. So we have completely bankrupt massive economy and a completely bankrupt social contract at the same time. What is their way out? So any way you look at it, you don't see a way out. And there's no unifying figure that could be able to come up with let's say, a reset of the notion of the American dream, in fact. Impossible. It's not going to be Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Definitely not. Especially considering his position on Israel and Gaza. Although today I learned that basically he's very far away from the cadaver and the guy who can go to jail, which are the 2 main candidates. Apparently, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is around 12%, so it's very, very far away. So we have to do something pretty drastic to get to 25, 30-something percent of popular interest to vote for him. I don't think it's going to happen. And of course, the system is totally calcified, bipartisan. The war party subdivided in 2 branches. So it's like a cancer now developing very fast, the whole thing. So what can you sell not only to your own internal population, to the rest of the world? There's nothing. And it's no wonder, because this is what we get every day. Even if you don't follow politics, you turn on your TV or you try to read a paper, or even you go on the net, what do you get from the Americans all the time? Threats and zero diplomacy about everything, about anything. And of course, mutual demonization of both parts of the Civil War, one demonizing the other 24/7. That's the only thing you get. The only thing you get. It's very, very sad. It's sad for many of us who, for instance, in my case, I lived in the US. I love the United States, people, the geology, pop culture, which can be very entertaining, etc. But when you look at foreign policy and you look at Washington, it's one of the major disasters in the history of humanity, in fact. And it has nothing to do with the real country, with real people.
Yeah, it's really a tragedy. You see people have 2 choices, Donald Trump or Joe Biden. None of them is working at all.
What kind of choice is that?
And the system doesn't let anybody gets in. RFK Jr., we have Jill Stein, Cornel West, many people who want to be part of this system, but they don't let anybody have any sort of little chance to win the election. Nothing is out there. And at the same time, they're talking about democracies and autocracies. Just leave me alone. What are you talking about?
Slogans, Nima, they are the masters of sloganeering, PR operations, soft power operations, creating narratives, creating false narratives. Nobody beats the Americans on that. Nobody. They are the absolute masters. The problem is practically 100% of all that is disconnected from reality. No wonder they have Hollywood. Hollywood is a dream factory. So they specialize in fabricating dreams and nightmares. Exactly. This is what they do. they cannot produce anything anymore. So it's not a productive economy. So even they betrayed the spirit of capitalism, we can say, because they are not a productive capitalist economy anymore. They produce weapons which are recycled inside their system. For instance, all this pantomime about sending weapons to Ukraine is basically because there will be a lot of extra money circulating inside the industrial military complex. And then 10% or so, if that, ends up in the Ukraine battlefields. And then it's destroyed on the spot. Like I saw this afternoon at the Park Peabody collection of Bradleys, you know. It's really pathetic.
Yeah, yeah. Just last but not least would be the conflict in Gaza, that it's so, the situation is so dire right now. And Israelis, they don't care about ICC, ICJ. They have three European countries, Ireland, Norway, and Spain. They have already recognized the state of Palestine. But it seems that it doesn't make any sort of pressure on Netanyahu and his administration to bring the tensions down. Do you see any sort of change coming to the United States foreign policy toward Netanyahu and his administration, or they're gonna help them, even declaring that they're not totally in with this concept of killing Gazan, but behind the scene they're helping Israelis? And how do you see the policy right now?
No, it's not going to change. It's not going to change because, first of all, because they are intertwined. Washington and Tel Aviv is basically the same continuum. The people who make the decisions are the same. The people who are behind paying for these decisions, they are the same. The logic of exploitation is the same. The difference is in Israel, you have settler colonialism. This means a straight exploitation in a way that the Americans, the Europeans don't do it anymore. They used to do it before, historically. But the logic, the capitalist logic of plundering with no limits is the same on both sides. We cannot even talk about both sides because they are intertwined. It's the logic of the American expansion, which was a settler colonialism as well, essentially, you know. So in the American psyche, they understand what the Israelis are doing. It's exactly what they did with the indigenous populations in North America. Same thing. And the worst thing is the way these settler colonialists and mega Zionists and ultra extremists and literal readers of the Old Testament, whatever, which way you want to call it. I prefer to call it the biblical psychopathological genocidals. I think it pretty much explains their mentality, you know. They feel that they are above anything, that they are really exceptional. So exceptionalism applies even more to Israel than to the empire, because he has all those religious, sacred, between commas, overtones. No? And they think they can get away with it. And on top of it, they are with their backs against the wall. If this government collapses, the guy who runs the government goes straight to jail, number one. And number two, these people, some of them, they will be hunted a little bit everywhere. But there are some other signs that are even more worrying, is that what they are doing in Gaza is supported by roughly 80% of the population.
That's right.
Whatever the polls, 74, 78, 80, it's around, it's the overwhelming majority of people who live in Israel support what Project Zionism is doing and support the genocide. So how to deal with these people from the point of view of the global majority, in fact? I wrote a column which is probably going to be out before St. Petersburg, probably going to be out on Monday. And the title is more or less, how can we dream or pretend that we're talking about multipolarity in the middle of a genocide. If you don't solve the genocide tragedy, you cannot build multipolarity. It's absolutely impossible. You know, are you going to build a multipolar world where you tolerate a state practicing genocide? This is absolutely out of the question, right? And this is where we are at the moment. We have the whole planet hostage to an entity that is committing a genocide, and everybody is impotent to stop it. And then the only way to stop it would be to inflict a major military defeat against Israel, which is something it can be done, but it's very complicated. And don't forget, those people have nuclear weapons, which they will use if they are cornered. They are sufficiently psychos to do that. So the problem is immense. How to restrain, at least, if not stop, these people? And because the intertwined system, Washington, Tel Aviv, is so strong, they have this sentiment of impunity that they can get away with anything. What we were watching since October 7 is them getting away with anything unspeakable by any term whatsoever, day after day after day. We come to a point where they launch missiles over refugee tents to burn children. This in the early 21st century. If this was the 12th century in some war in the middle of Eurasia, say, oh, of course, makes sense. If this was a Genghis Khan tactic, yeah, makes sense. And nobody can do anything about it. We have at least people with balls like the Houthis who can attack a U.S. aircraft carrier. This beats anything, because it proves to the whole global majority that one little symbolic act can work wonders. But that won't stop the Americans from protecting the people who are committing the genocide. You see? So this is our dilemma. We are all hostages of something that is escaping the boundary of humanity, to put it very diplomatically, committing a genocide in 21st century, and no entity, no institution, no state, no coalition of states, nothing is capable of stopping them.